here, Max. Come here. Get in with me. Say, I can fly.
I can fly.
I can fly. Oh, come on. Say it with your chest.
I can fly.
Say it, Max. Shout it out. I can fly.
They shall mount up with wings as eagles, and there shall be no more death.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. First thing and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory unto Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rahakwadash. Secondly, I want to give double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who taught me this truth and righteousness and in sincerity. And third of all, I want to give salutations to the hopeful elect that's out on the highways and byways teaching and preaching this word in truth and in sincerity. The title of this lesson is this is going to be a part 3 of my going into the book of Proverbs series. And I'm going to be continuing on where I left off, which was the last scripture I had read was verse 10. So I'm going to start off with verse 11 in the book of Proverbs, the 3rd chapter. So it reads, "My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, neither be weary of his correction." Right. So what does it mean to despise the Lord's chastening? Let's grab that word, despise. What does it mean to despise something? It says to reject, despise, refuse, to flow, run. Right. Flowing away from or running away from it, So the Lord is chastening you to go into to forsake the left-handed way, to forsake wickedness, and to turn to righteousness, to the right-handed way. But if you're refusing the chastening of the Lord, then you will begin to flow away from the way that the Lord is trying to lead you to go to. You're going to begin to flow on the wrong side of the road, on the left side of the road instead of the right side of the road that leads to salvation, and that's the side of the road that we are being chastened to go upon. If we be at that number, the Lord is not, chastening us, correcting us, and, guiding us away from this wickedness for no reason. It's for our salvation, for us to stay on this path that we're on. That's why we're not supposed to despise the correction. We're not supposed to despise the chastening. But it says to reject. Let's grab this word despise in the dictionary. It says feel contempt or a deep repugnance for, detest. Right, so you want nothing to do with it. You want nothing to do with the Lord's correction because you don't understand it ultimately. Because ultimately when it comes to the Lord's corrections, it's bigger than the Lord just having a man telling you about yourself and just yelling at you all the time. And by the man, I'm speaking to the prophets of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai, who are judging, which is going into guiding our people and telling them the way that they are supposed to be walking and the way that they're not supposed to be walking. We're not supposed to look at them guiding us and telling us to lead us along as them just bugging us and nitpicking. They just want to say something. Nah, it's spiritual, because certain things we have to leave, certain things we have to cut off in order for us to be found perfect before Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. So it says, "My son, despise not the chastening of the Lord." So don't refuse the chastening, don't reject it. Those are some of the definitions that was just brought up when I grabbed it in the blue letter. But it says, despise not the chastening. Now let's grab that word chastening. It means discipline, chastening, correction. Right. So that discipline, literally, when you look at it, the Lord chastening us is the Lord telling us to become more disciplined. Whether it be you consuming too much social media, any form of correction that will come, regarding that situation, it's ultimately going to be the Lord telling you you need to discipline yourself in, some way, shape, or form. Whether it be cutting it off completely for a period of time, or limiting the amount of consumption you are, consuming when it comes to that, whatever it is. But I'm speaking of social media, whatever outlet of distractions that we have, or whatever we're dealing with, the Lord comes with, that discipline, that order, because that is what is of our nation. That's how we run things, through order. It's order within the body. We have different ranks, and everybody are within their rank according to their lot. But it says chastening correction. So if you the word correction means the action or process of correcting something, rectifying punishment, right? So punishments, they come to bring forth correction. If you got a child that was living its life outside of your household, and they wasn't taught certain things, from their youth, certain foundational things that will help them be more disciplined when they grow up, or, have more of a foundation, within themselves. And then they come back into your household and you have those things within yourself, you're going to see that, And if they're still young enough, especially, you're going to begin kind of, feeding them different things and correcting them when you see certain things, For example, if they have a glutton spirit on them, they consuming too many things, in excess, whether it be food, social media, music, you can, as that parent that do have discipline, you can begin to establish certain things, especially when you're in the truth, because you have a certain level of spiritual wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, according to your portion. But, you're able to feed that into your child, so that they can grow up and be more structured, and have more of a spiritual foundation, more discipline, so that they can have more fruits of the Spirit. And that is what the Lord is doing with us, because the correction ain't always go be just, the Lord just telling us politely, hey, don't do this, come over here and do this. Sometimes the Lord go yell at us, or sometimes the Lord go, hit us with the belt, and that comes through different situations that will manifest, on the physical plane, whether you get rebuked at camp, whether, something happened to you in the flesh and it's because you was doing something, and then the Spirit reveals to you that it was something that, the Spirit was trying to keep you away from, but you didn't leave it alone. So you had to go through a situation that actually showed you and made you, discipline yourself. That's all the Lord, and this is all going into the Lord's chastening, his corrections, him trying to install discipline, him installing discipline within us, and if we be those men, the men of Yahweh Shema Shai, the election, that 144,000, if we be those men, ultimately all of the chastening that we're going through, all of the corrections, the rebukes, it's all going to lead up to us being made perfect, so that we will be saved, so that we will not be affected by the temptations and the doubt that is about to be poured out upon this place, the fear and the terror, that will come straight from the judgments of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. It says, neither be wary of his correction. Right, so don't be wary of it. That word wary, it says to be grieved, loathe, abhor, feel a loathing or abhorrence or sickening dread. Right, so you not anticipating receiving your rebuke or your correction. You done did something wrong, or you might have offended a brother, and you thinking in your head, man, I don't feel like hearing the bishop. I don't feel like hearing this brother's mouth. I don't got time. I didn't do this or this and that. You just, oh my God, it's always something. Brothers always got something to say, or this and that, huffing and puffing, because you're not being spiritual, because regardless of what the situation is, you're supposed to trust in Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai and understand that it is all of the Lord. So no matter what, there's something for you to get out of this situation and learn out of this situation, So if you moving in a spiritual manner, no matter if you in the right or in the wrong in that situation, no matter what the situation is, you're going to be more at peace and have more order about yourself within that situation, because you're not being rebellious. You're not moving in that rebellious, I don't want to hear nothing type of spirit. Brothers can't tell you no form of correction, give you no form of guidance, because you always feel like they coming at you, or they trying to talk to you like you a child, like you don't know something, because we are always supposed to be, seeing ourselves as little children, ready to be taught, because that's what we are. We're nothing. So we're supposed to stay humble and be ready for the corrections, be ready for the guidance and the rebukes, for the Lord to show his displeasure when we go off, when we fall short, because that's just what we have to go through in this world that we're in this captivity. But it says in verse 12, for whom the Lord Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai loveth, he correcteth. Right, so the Lord is not going to correct you. He's not going to chastise you. He's not going to rebuke you, which is going into him showing his displeasure to you. He's not going to do that to you if he don't care about you. Because what need would he have to do it? You're going to tell somebody, if you see them driving down a road that's going to lead to a drop off, that's going to lead to a dead end where it's a cliff, and they could possibly drive right off and die, you're going to tell them, no, don't drive down that road. Stop. Go on this side of the road. Go on the right side of the road, because the left side of the road caved in, and it is a drop off now. You will drive off of the road and die. If you love somebody or you cared about that person, you're going to warn them. But if not, you're not going to say anything. You're going to let them just drive off that road, And that's what the Lord is doing with us. It's just our people are so stuck in their ways that they can't let go of this world. So anything that's telling them to let go of this world, they despise, and ultimately it's because they despise Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, because from the beginning we have been told to leave these heathens alone and leave their ways alone. We have been told to only be for our power, which is Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, the Heavenly Father in the name of the Son. That's our power, and our people, since the beginning, since Adam and Eve, they have been, continuously desiring to go off. Us being within these sinful bodies, being subject to sin, it has been a continuous cycle, of our people desiring to do everything but what we are told, divinely from our power, So our people, they hate the correction, and they don't understand that it comes from a place of love. You know, they don't understand that the only reason the Lord has us preaching and teaching this word is for our people to come back to their heritage, come back to them, their true selves, you know, so that righteousness can be established upon the earth, you know, so that we will never have to experience pain again, sorrow and worry. We will never have to experience these things again, you know, once what we were created and called to do is made manifest upon the earth, which is waking up the flock, you know, waking up the elect, you know. But our people don't understand that is why we are doing what we are doing, you know. And I'm speaking of 2/3 of the nation of Israel, the majority of our nation. You know, they despise the corrections that we preach, you know, telling them to forsake the ways of this world and come back to the ways of Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. They forsake that love. They despise it, you know. And it's because you know, as a whole, they just were not chosen to believe, you know, to be able to see and understand what we're saying. You know, they can hear it, but they don't actually receive it, you know. They eat it, but they don't consume it, you know. But it reads, even as a father, the son in whom he delighteth. Right, so if you have a son, let's say you got 3 children, and they are sons, but you got one that's like the golden child. You can just see a whole lot of potential in him. You know, he good at a whole lot of things, and he learned very quickly. You go do everything you can to make sure that he grow up right, that he doing the right things, he got the right influences in his life. You go be harder on him. You go be checking on him more. You know, you go be more, you dealing with him closer, you know, because you want to make sure that he, you know, does what he can do. You know, what you want to make sure that the potential that you see in him is brought out, you know, so you go be way more, you know, involved and way harder on him, you know. And that is what the Lord does with those in whom he loves, you know. When you are called and woken up and told to leave this world alone, you know, and you're told the true names of your power, you know, the Father and the Son, you know, and you're told, you know, who Esau is, you know, why you are in the position you're in, you know, how you are not a slave, you know, but you are a future king, you know. The Lord does these things ultimately because he sees you as a child in whom he delights. You know, he delights in you. You're one of his favorites, you know. So that is why, one, we receive this truth, you know, especially if we be at a elect, you know, we are one of those children that the Lord delights in, you know, being those first fruits of Yahweh Shai, the elect, you know. So ultimately it's because the Lord delights in you, and you know, the chastening and the corrections and the, you know, rebukes, they are also part of that love, you know, because that's the only way that we are able to let these things go, you know, by the Lord having us feel that fire, you know, letting us go through certain difficulties and, you know, letting us fall low in certain situations and being broke down so that we can see that the only light is in him, you know. And that's how Yahweh Shai learned. You know, the scriptures say he learned obedience through the things he suffered, you know, roughly paraphrasing. So that's how we are being taught, you know, in that same, we're going down that same purifying process that Yahweh Shai did. But it says in verse 13, happy is the man that findeth wisdom and the man that getteth understanding. Right. And you can only find wisdom and understanding by enduring the chastening, you know, receiving the corrections and understanding that it is all love and that it's all to push you to life and not to have you just let go of everything you have in this world to just die, You know, you're letting go of the bullshit in this world to get the everlasting gifts and love and pleasure of the kingdom. You know, it says in verse 14, for the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. Right. And that's that everlasting merchandise of the kingdom. That spiritual merchandise that will never perish. You know, this wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, these new bodies never having to die or get tired. You know, these things, this silver and gold that we see has nothing on the spiritual things that we're going to receive. It has nothing on us being in 100% unison with our power, you know, having that 100% faith 24/7, never having to have a doubtful thought or feel an ache and pain in our body. You know, these are the things that we are receiving if we continue to endure, you know, if we don't forsake the corrections and the chastening of the Lord. You know, if we don't forsake the spirit of the Lord that is guiding us away from this world and the ways of it, you know, and, you know, into the world of Yahushai, you know, in the ways of that world, which are unseen and, you know, unheard of within this world. You know, that's why it's so easy to just stay just like everybody else that you see every day in this world, you know. But we have been called to change, to be peculiar, you know, which is odd, you know, strange to this world, because we are not of it. We are just living within it. It says in verse 15, she is more precious than rubies, and all the things thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. Right. It says length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Right. You can't compare these things to the things that you can get in this world. You know, it says in verse 15, and all the things the things thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. So anything you can desire in this world, you know, small or great, nothing that you can desire in this world can be compared to what you're going to receive in the kingdom. It tell you a little bit of the things in verse 16. Length of days is in her right hand, everlasting life, never dying, never getting sick, you know, never feeling nauseous, you know, never having to bury a loved one. That's length of days. It says, and in her left hand riches and honor. Right. Having the everlasting kingdom, the most glorious and powerful kingdom to ever rule or exist, and that ever will. And that kingdom also being a kingdom that will never fall. You know, there will never be another kingdom that rises up above that kingdom. That's going to be the type of kingdom that we are about to receive. You know, riches and honor, being the rulers and the kings within that kingdom, being the judges, you know, starting with the elect, being the judges of the nation of Israel and over all of the nations, you know, judging the 12 tribes. You know, it says in verse 17, her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. Right. Having your heart's desire, like I said, them new bodies. So within that kingdom, which is going to be glorious, you know, you're never going to feel pain or get tired, and everything that's going to be around you is going to be full of life. It's going to be fully vibrant, not polluted and defiled at all. You know, it's going to be in its pure natural state, how the Lord created it to be. You know, everything is going to be happy. The animal life, the plant life, you know, the Israelite life, you know. And it says in verse 18, she is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her. Right, this truth, you know. It is a tree of life, you know, and when we lay hold onto it, we are able to take of that fruit, you know. We are able to consume the life that is within that tree, which is this truth, you know. We are able to consume the fruit of the men that were laboring before us, reading their testimonies, you know, and we're able to grow through that nutrition, you know, that they, you know, gathered through their experiences, you know, and we're able to, you know, collectively as a whole, slowly but surely grow to our full potential that we're going to need to be in before Yahweh Shai comes back, you know, according to all of our lots, whatever our complete potential is, you know, the Lord is going to have us grow to that point in that position before all hell breaks loose, you know, before, you know, the end, I will say, you know, before Yahweh Shai comes back, you know, because we're still going to be going through trials and tests within the midst of Jacob's trouble, you know, within the midst of anarchy. But, you know, we're being built up, you know, and this chastening of the Lord has a lot to do with it. Us going through the good and the bad, you know, and us learning from both of them, from both ends of the spectrum. Because no matter if it's negative or positive, you know, if you receiving some negative feedback from a brother or some positive feedback from a brother or somebody in the world, it's all ultimately for our betterment if we be the men of Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai. It's a lesson within it no matter what. We just got to have that spiritual eye and look at it spiritually. But it says in verse 19, the Lord Yahweh B'Hashem Yahweh Shai, by wisdom. Okay, I'm a close it out on here, because for time's sake and because this is where I plan on closing it off. So I'm going to start off part 4, verse 19, you know, Lord willing, sooner than later. But I hope I was able to edify you, brothers and sisters, and that I was able to bring this point out clearly. And until next time, Shalom.